It's 2009. I'm an attorney. My client is in his early 30s. He is a father of two, and he walks into my office looking for work. He's just gotten out of prison. He has a strong work history. He's consistent. He's currently enrolled in college, so he's excited to start his future over again. But every time he gets to the part of the job application where he has to talk about his criminal history, his hands tremble like the vibration from the prison doors locking him in. This is the only secret that he wants to keep locked away. 5 years earlier, I'm working for the National Organization for Women. I organized the largest march in the history of the United States, the 2004. Yes. The 2004 March for Women's Lives. We brought 1.2 million women and their supporters to Washington, D.C. to be able to support women's rights and reproductive justice. We organized womb circles of powerful women. Their strides were strong, but some of their voices quivered. Like the hands pushing back the fist or the clothes hangers of their past. The writing was on their wounds. They were struggling to show up. These women had secrets of abortions, of sexual orientation, of violence. And yes, they were committed to the march, but some of them were more committed to their self-doubt and their lack of self-trust than they were to telling their stories. These were the stories that they preferred to keep in the womb because birthing them was far more painful than childbirth. Then I had my own secrets that were locked in mysterious rusted red vans and dirty trailer parks. In middle school is when I first started changing my name because I didn't want anybody to be able to associate my two very different identities. By 12 years old, I was ready to fight anybody that would dare to question my sacred pseudo-virginity. And by 19 years old, I had been in well over 50 fights from the mouths of the Souths. And I had the razor blade scars on my face to prove it. I had lied about my history so much that I almost forgot that it happened until I got to the steeple of my career as an attorney when all of my secrets came spilling out of the front door to the public, like a hungry church congregation coming out of Sunday service. This was the first time that I was confronted with one of my greatest strengths, my greatest assets, and also the gatekeeper to the other side of my client's success. But first, let me take you back to 1991. It's 2 weeks before Christmas. I'm 11 years old. I'm excited because this is the first day of Christmas break, so I get to hang out with my friends a little bit longer. But today, something was different. When I got home, the door was locked. But I could still hear my 6-month-old little brother and my 4-year-old little brother on the other side crying, so I knew I had to break in. And when I did, I realized that they were alone. I didn't realize it at the time, but my mother had just been shot and almost raped in a crack cocaine deal that went bad. This was the first time I felt heart palpitations, because this was the first time my heart started to break. My mother palpitating in and out of crack cocaine addiction. My father in and out of jail and prison, and me palpitating in and out of sex work. But here's the conundrum. I always knew that I wanted to be an attorney ever since I was 8 years old. I repeatedly saw the people I loved abused by the criminal industrial complex with no one to help them to navigate the system. So just like my clients, I had a goal, I had a target. But I also had a secret sex life. By the time I was 19 years old, I had been pregnant 5 times. I had 5 abortions. I had a criminal record, and I was always in the company of questionable people. So just like my clients, I also had an impediment to my target and my goals. And that impediment was my history of sex work. It was my scarlet letter. So I hid it, I lied, I projected this melanated overachiever that had never done anything wrong. And I convinced myself that my intelligence and my good deeds and my pseudo-success would somehow erase every secret that I ever had. And it worked until it didn't. My clientele, my temper, and the way that I ran my practice all screamed that I was operating in past trauma that hadn't been resolved. And everybody around me could hear it, except me. And it only took me challenging a judge and trying to embarrass the district attorney's office for attorney regulation to start digging in my past. And let me tell you, when a judge has it out for you, it don't matter whether you're wrong or right, it's going to be a public whipping. So let me tell you about it. So I'm in the middle of a trial, and throngs of people start building up in the back of the room. You see, they had told everybody else what was about to happen before they told me. Now, my heart wasn't just beating, it was rattling, because there were so many different emotions that was happening on the inside. Confusion, anger, fear, indignation. I felt like the entire state had just come to witness my beheading. It was 30 seconds before there was hundreds of people in the back of that courtroom. And I still felt like I was isolated. And before I knew it, attorney regulation was questioning my past. Publications were put out to expose me. And my friends, who I thought were my friends for the last 10 years, act like they didn't even know me. There were so many lies that was mixed up with the truth, but my shame had me so wounded that all I wanted to do was stop the bleeding. You see, my business, that was my first love. So I couldn't take it. I couldn't fight. I couldn't defend myself. I couldn't distinguish the lies from the truth because my shame had sliced me open well before attorney regulation had. Attorney regulation just beat my butt. They beat everything that I ever had out of me. They beat out my business. They beat out my law degree, my license, my house, my employees, my friends. They beat out my self-worth. And I was used to taking some beatings, but this broke my heart. What's interesting is that I was so concerned and afraid with people understanding and knowing about my prostitution that I didn't realize that the prostitute archetype was my heartbeat to redemption. Now, when I say prostitute archetype, let me explain to you in a little bit more detail what I mean. When they took away everything, I felt like I died for about 7 years. And then I transitioned my law firm into a business architect firm, and I studied psychology. And because I wanted to help my clients in a way that I couldn't help myself, I also started studying Carl Jung and Carolyn Meese. And that's when I was introduced to this gorgeous goddess called the prostitute archetype. And I don't want you guys to get all mushy on me because the prostitute archetype, it's an archetype of psychology. It's one of the 4 survival archetypes. That means that it's a personality type that every single one of us has. And it shows up when we are in survival mode. So some of you may have heard of the archetype, the inner child. Well, guess what? There's an inner prostitute as well. So that you guys can get where I'm going, let me give you a little bit about the definition of prostitution. Normally, when we talk about prostitution, we're referring to a person, usually a woman, who is engaging in sexual activity in exchange for payment. We're talking about someone who is using or misusing their talents in exchange for personal or financial gains. But understand that this is just a byproduct. When I say that this is a byproduct, I mean that this is society imputing its social and political negative connotations on the word. Because without the judgment, the word has a Latin root, and it simply means to expose publicly or to offer for sale. So the prostitute archetype shows up in our lives, in our relationships, in our business, in our negotiations, in our finances, anytime we are exchanging something. So let's take the judgment out of the prostitute archetype in your life. Your prostitute archetype is your gatekeeper, your guardian to your self-esteem, your self-worth, your shame, and it shows up when your life, your livelihood, and your security is at risk. But let me ask you, how are you using this power? What are you currently exchanging? Now, the prostitute archetype doesn't just deal with any type of shame. It's a very unique type of shame. On one hand, we have the shame where the world says it's not your fault. It's forgivable. Maybe you were a child, so it's not your fault. Maybe you were sick or had cancer, so it's not your fault. Maybe you were in poverty, so it's not your fault. But on the other hand, we have a very different type of shame. The shame that the world says is unforgivable. The shame where the world says that you did this to yourself, so it is your fault. When the world tells you that you are the villain, that you are the embarrassment, that you are the failure, and not only will they never forgive you, but they will never forget. This type of shame doesn't just become a part of our actions. This type of shame becomes a part of our identity. For example, instead of teaching children that we all make mistakes and that we can learn and grow from them, what do we hear adults tell children? You should be ashamed of yourself. Instead of embracing rehabilitation in the criminal industrial complex, we stigmatize ex-felons for life. Anytime we hear about a woman's history sexually, we label them a whore or a slut and unworthy of respect and future relationships. Yes, there is a dark and a light side to the prostitute archetype. But this pattern is only embracing the dark side. My 30-something-year-old client that walked into my office was just one example of what institutional shame looks like when it's hidden. Just like mold. When it's in dark places, it grows and it gets heavier and bigger until we can't see our own value anymore, until we can't walk proudly in our divine purpose and our success. The University of Toronto actually did a study on this. And what they found is that this shame results in psychological traumas and depression, as well as social and general anxiety. But it doesn't just stop in Canada, because it has manifested into the United States having the largest recidivism rates in the world. Currently, 44% of people that are released from prison end up going back within the first year. In 2004, we had 1.2 million examples of what institutional shame looks like. But it didn't just stop on the Washington Mall, because currently 78,000 women are still dying every year from unsafe abortions. 34% of women that are injured by their intimate partners get medical treatment. 27% of women that are physically assaulted report it to the police. When we're quantifying sexual orientation, the Yale Public School of Health found that 83% of the LGBTQ+ still feel like they have to hide their sexual orientation. And 64% of them will end up experiencing some type of violence. Not to mention that the LGBTQ+ and youth are 4 times more likely to consider suicide. This is a byproduct of us only embracing the dark side of the prostitute archetype. And just like society has stigmatized women's sexuality, has taught us that it's something to be hidden and covered up, has taught us that when we want to take autonomy over what we decide to exchange our sexuality for, that we are criminals. This is the same way that we have internalized our worst mistakes. I will always be the first one to raise their hand for institutional change, but this talk is about your personal reformation first. The prostitute archetype is a conversation about an exchange of your personal power. There's a reason that I say that we have to master our prostitute archetype instead of avoiding it or condemning it. Because when we avoid it, we're only embracing the dark side of the prostitute archetype. And anytime we're only acknowledging the dark, we will always compromise our power in exchange for perceived peace. And this works as a social construct because this dark place, these hidden secrets, this shame is what allows somebody else or something else to master you. Now, we may not see this exchange visually, but this is where the transfer of power happens while we're waiting for somebody else to forgive, forget, and find value. Now, somebody else has the right to determine when we are worthy, what our worth is, and what we can exchange it for. And it's only advantageous to them because they are the ones that are deciding the price they have to pay for our gifts. And it becomes exponentially detrimental when they no longer have to pay you anything for your gifts. And you have to pay them to be able to prove your worth. Maybe we should really examine our moral compass when it comes to shame and regret. What if we decided to meet the moment and wear it on our chest? What if we decided to take our power back? Now, every single person in this room has a scarlet letter. You've had a mistake that you made you feel unforgivable. There's a secret that you had that made you feel unsavable. You have compromised your integrity. You have walked the walk. And I would call it a host role since we're talking about the prostitute archetype. But this is a TED Talk, so you ain't heard it from me. I say that because that may be how the world sees you. When they don't understand where your power comes from, when they don't understand the strength in your stride, when they don't understand how you can walk into a wall of judgment and condemnation and not skip a beat, when you can't be enticed or bought or stigmatized because the only price that matters is the price that you decide based on your values and your integrity. They don't understand because your truth and your power doesn't come from the outside. It doesn't come from your political affiliation. It doesn't come from your mama or your daddy. It doesn't come from your school. It doesn't come from your religion. Your truth and your power is not gifted to you by somebody else with permission. You are born with it. Yes. My prostitute archetype changed the lens on how I saw my lying and my hiding and my secrets. And I realized that that sex worker of my youth became the madam of my wisdom years. That 11-year-old little girl that climbed up that balcony in order to protect my siblings, she had determination. That 12-year-old little girl that was in a community that was poisoned with crack cocaine addiction, she had vision. That 13-year-old little girl who fought with fists and kicks, she had fire. That 14-year-old girl who had heard way too much pillow talk became a mother with a powerful listening ear. That 15-year-old sex worker self-learned to be able to talk to anybody, even if their backgrounds were drastically different, gave me the power to relate to juries and get not guilties even when my veteran counterparts could not. That 16-year-old sex worker, self-turned entrepreneur, was able to confidently sell anything, regardless of whether it was $100 or $100,000, something that I handsomely charge for today. So I implore you to take full inventory of all of your talents, all of your value, even if you feel like it's negative. I implore you to appeal to your prostitute archetype and have them change your lens from dark to light. I implore you to stop waiting for someone else to forgive you because you have to forgive yourself first. And I promise you, you'll find just like I did, that your prostitute archetype is your protector, your provider. It will empower you. And when you join forces with it, you can't help but to walk in your truth. I asked you guys a little bit earlier, what if we chose to stop hiding? If we chose to stop holding on to those secrets, those greatest regrets, those scarlet letters? What if we chose to meet the moment and wear it on our chest? Today, I stand more fully in my prostitute archetype. This process over the last 3 months in this TEDx talk has really triggered my self-esteem, and my shame started to resurface. But I kept on writing, and I kept on forgiving, and I kept on showing up. Because when you meet the moment, your scarlet letter will metamorphosize into your superhero emblem. And your shame, baby, your shame will become unapologetic self-worth and success, turning into your superpower.